Now, throughout history, humans have revered the spiritual importance of trees, with many societies and cultures even worshiping them. Animistic beliefs gave trees actual indwelling spirits, with many believed to even be gods and goddesses, especially evident in Germanic and Norse traditions, but elsewhere as well. The jinn were said to haunt trees in early Arabic traditions, while the Greeks and Romans had dryads as well. And those of India had yakshis. Collections of trees were believed to hold special powers and were set aside as sacred groves. Specific trees in general were viewed as more sacred than others, like the oak or evergreen or date palm or eucalyptus or olive or Bodhi or pine, with special magical and curative properties. And don't get me started about the origins of the Christmas tree. Many mythologies feature the tree of life or the world tree as an important symbol, from the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, as opposed to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, along with the Kabbalah tree of life in Judaism, to the even Assyrian and Mayan world trees. I must say, you are in for a special treat. oh, uh, so let's get to the root of this ancient mystery and see how these ideas branch out so many other exciting areas of investigation, or you may just simply leave. Okay. You just want to throw me in somebody's trunk. Okay, so let's jump into it. Okay. As far as the evidence proceeds, trees appear to be regarded as intrinsically sacred from the earliest of eras and by most groups of people because of the prevalent belief in animism, defining that within everything there is a spirit. As time progresses, a kind of qualified animism begins to evolve with certain trees, whether in kind or in specific locality, individual or within groves, were more sacred than others. In areas where animism has not been so inundated in later spiritual and religious innovations, ancient perceptions regarding individual sacred trees or groups of trees and groves or specific kinds of sacred trees in type has not changed all that much. Examples of the retention of these ancient views are inclusive of much of Africa and South America and Asia, with India and Japan still having sacred woods, of course, in other areas as well. Amongst the vegetative realm, the trees in morphology is most definitely the biggest living plant on the earth. And because of this heightened significance, pun intended, trees gain a more pronounced amount of attention in regards to these spiritual associations. So we have a mic on. Trees are not only bigger than us, they outlive us as well, living for many generations, often hundreds of years, and in some cases, over 1,000. Yet while they may live longer than humans, they go through changes in connection to the seasons, appearing to wither and to die by the wintertime, only to renew, resurrect in a sense, and thrive in the spring. As a result, they were believed connected to the life force of the seasons. Enforcing this idea of a tree moving from life to death and then to life again is represented by their fruits and their nuts, if they have them, that wither and die, fall upon the ground with new life springing forth from their seeds. In this sense, trees were understood as representations of life and its regeneration, eventually giving birth to the idea of the tree of life within many cultures. Trees with their limbs reaching so high in the sky and with their roots set so deeply in the earth, were also understood as bridging the gap between heaven and the underworld, while anchoring in the realm of the earth itself. Because of this fact, many trees were viewed as representing the tripartite cosmos of the netherworld, earth, and heaven, also called the cosmic tree. Because they combined the three worlds, they were also viewed as conduits of sacred energy that channeled from both above and below. Divine power then could move through them, and via the tree spirits or gods could send messages. Where did they get this idea from? Well, proof of this idea was how trees seem to attract lightning. And so they would observe that there is this lightning that appears to be coming from above. And remember, they're not scientists. And what happens? It shoots all the way down, it hits the tree. Many of you have approached a tree that has been struck by lightning, and you realize that oftentimes I have seen it myself, not the lightning striking the tree, but right afterwards. And I've seen for myself that oftentimes the trunk is excavated down below. And so what they think to themselves is this is a visible representation of this communication from the sky above to the earth and to the underworld. For after all, how come it leaves this hole? So these must indeed be holy and sacred conduits. Remember, we have to think like the Paleolithic and Neolithic person, right? They're not subject to our perspectives and viewpoints. They only know what they see and they make deductions because of that. And so as a result, trees were viewed as sacred, but also as literally conduits of these kinds of energies. So if properly approached to ritually link to a tree, meant to harness potent powers. Hence, trees became associated with, guess what? Oracles, imparting divine knowledge to those who knew how to access it. They then became portals to the chthonic as well as the celestial realms. Isn't that fascinating? So we see all the way back, Paleolithic and Neolithic age, we see representations of materials that are set before ancient trees, where ancient man and woman are before these beautiful organic towers and doing various rituals that connect to the skies above, to the earth, as well as below the earth. In fact, early humans then oftentimes use trees for various totems carved out of wood. For example, at the caves of Lascaux in France, there is an image of a pole with a bird's body and bird-like head on top. This is an example of one of these totems appearing next to a male figure with a pronounced phallus. We see this kind of representation everywhere. By the way, just to throw this one in for free, sometimes when early humanity figured out that it wasn't just the female aspect or the yoni that had a creative principle, sometimes the trees were viewed as a phallus of a sort, if that makes any sense. And you're going to see this even in connection to Indian beliefs and the great phallus of Shiva, which was said to move beyond all the worlds and was greater than Vishnu and Brahma. And there's stories about that. So let's keep on going, shall we? So let's move to Mesopotamia. Okay, throughout Mesopotamia, the Near East and beyond, sacred trees were featured in sacred garden complexes dedicated to earth goddesses. These gardens all the more regarded because water was needed to keep them thriving in general, which is regarded as a luxury. Remember, Mesopotamia is in a very arid position. And so water is something that needs to be saved. And yet, because of the importance of these sacred gardens, they will make sure that the irrigation channels don't necessarily go to the crops, but also go to these sacred groves because these places are considered sacred. For example, fruit trees planted in elaborate gardens often surround the shrines dedicated to the goddess Inanna. When it came time for harvest to eat the first fruits from her trees, they were viewed as partaking of her sacred power. And we're going to see this idea within many different systems in Mesopotamia or even throughout the Greco Roman world, that these gardens that are surrounding these temples are imbued with sacred energy of that deity. And so to partake of the fruit means also to partake of that special energy. Okay, so also, of course, ziggurats were viewed as sacred mountains. However, their ramp terraces were planted with trees, which is connected to the idea of paradise. Of course, we cannot forget the hanging gardens of Babylon. Let's talk a little bit about Inanna. So let's go to the first image and see this goddess. And we would tell the story about Inanna and the Huluppu tree. Here we go. Here's Inanna. Now, there's a Sumerian poem that tells how Inanna rescued a sacred tree from a great flood on the first day of creation. I'm going to read a little bit of this account. It says, at that time, it was planted, a single tree, by the banks of the great river. Enki, the father, did plant the Huluppu tree. The god of wisdom, he planted it by the banks of the Euphrates before he set sail, before the father departed for the underworld. Where is where is the father going? He's actually on his way to go to be with Ereshkigal, who is the queen of the underworld, and she's not very happy to see him. So the tree, the account continues, was nurtured by the waters of the Euphrates, the very waters that carried Enki to the sea. Small windstones were tossed against him. Large hailstones were hurled up against him like unrushing turtles. They charged the keel of Enki's boat. So basically, what's happening is the Great Father is meeting with Ereshkigal, and she's kind of kicking and screaming because he's entering into her realm. And she's not very happy about it. So that's kind of what's going on. I do love the phrase like unrushing turtles. I think we should use that one. So the whirling south wind arose and blew upon the tree. Let's go to the next image. We do have an ancient image of the tree, the Huluppu tree. There we go. So the south wind arose and blew upon the tree, pulling at its roots and ripping out its branches until the waters of the Euphrates carried it away. A young woman who walked in fear of no man and would not be owned plucked the tree from the river and spoke. I shall bring this tree to Uruk. I shall plant this tree in my holy gardens. And that, of course, is Inanna. It says, Inanna cared for the tree with her hand. She settled the earth around the tree with her foot. She wondered, how long will it be until I have a shining throne to sit upon? How long will it be until I have a luscious bed to lie upon? Don't we think about that? How long is it going to take for me to get my throne and get a nice luscious bed? Come on. I've been waiting for a while here. Anyway, so the years passed, 5 years, then 10 years. The tree grew thick, but its bark did not split. So I guess its bark is stronger than its bite. Okay, moving right along. I'm barking on the right tree, that one. Then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the huluppu tree. I guess let's go to the next image. There's a representation of the huluppu tree. Isn't that cool? And look right next to that on the right. Yes, that is right. That is a serpent. That should be interesting. So then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the huluppu tree. The anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. Sometimes Lilith or Lilitu is translated as owl, which you may find very interesting. Of course, obviously, the serpent represents rebirth. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the snake steals the flower of rebirth. Also, the serpent represents sexuality because of its phallic shape. And so the serpent could not be charmed. This means that the serpent is immune to civilizing forces, to civilization. The Anzu bird, this is, we know from the Ninurta turtle story, yes, Mesopotamians apparently love turtles. We know that this bird tries to steal the attributes of civilization and knowledge. You gotta love the society. There's actually a word for the idea of civilization and knowledge, and that word is me, meh, not meh as an meh, but me or meh. And of course is Enki, who is the one who holds this meh. Well, the Anzu bird tries to steal this. This bird has the face of a lion and the wings of an eagle, and craves power and knowledge. Now, the third, of course, is Lilith. This is the owl or Lilitu. Sometimes in Sumerian or Babylonian, as well as Assyrian literature, the Lilitu is connected to Inanna as a helpmate. In other cases, she is connected as a daemon spirit. Um, and of course, obviously, in Jewish belief, she is connected to being the first wife of Adam. Okay, so this tree is now occupied by these three, right? So the young woman, I'll continue. I'm actually reading the primary source, which is kind of cool. The young woman who loved to laugh wept. Oh, how Inanna wept! Yet they would not leave her tree. As the birds began to sing at the coming of the dawn, the sun god Utu left his royal bedchamber, but he wouldn't help. You can see my face. That's those pictures anyway. So if you want to see my face, I don't know. You may want to see the tree. So Inanna called, and Utu, who is the sun god, would not help. So Inanna called out to Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh, in summary, struck the serpent who could not be charmed. So, by the way, he's brandishing these weapons, right? He brandishes a bronze axe, which of course is the cutting weapon of civilization, and so he defeats the serpent with, of course, his axe. He does have an axe to grind right there. The Anzu bird, of course, flew with its young to the mountains, and the Lilith, it smashed her home and fled to the wild, uninhabited places. So Gilgamesh loosened the roots of the huluppu tree, and then the sons of the city accompanied him and cut off the branches of this tree. From the trunk of the tree, he carved the throne for his holy sister. From the trunk of the tree, Gilgamesh carved a bed for Inanna. From the roots of the tree, she fashioned a puku for his her brother, and from the crown of the tree, Inanna fashioned a miku for Gilgamesh, hero of Uruk. So you have this display of going back and forth between the divine feminine and the divine masculine that's coming about. So in many ways, this tree represents dual forces. It represents Enki and Ereshkigal. It represents light. It represents darkness. It represents male. It represents female. It represents life. It represents death. It represents the wilderness of nature, the wildness of nature, right? It represents these ideas. It's unbridled, right? And then it gets captured, right? And then it gets civilized, right? And she puts it into a garden. She places it in the garden. So Inanna who is connected to the wild things at times, is also a representation of the transformation from the realm of nature and that which is wild to moving towards civilization, bringing it to the garden, and then from the garden being fashioned into her throne, and into her bed. Does that make sense? So it is this gradual domestication of the tree. But also we see from this story and other stories besides that the Hulapud tree is connected to the underworld of Ereshkigal, the earth of Enlil, and the heavens of On. It is really the world tree. Yes, it's the idea of the world tree. And this world tree has, as we know from this story, it is a world tree that's connected to Enki and wisdom and knowledge. It's a world tree, and it is also a tree of knowledge. And there's a serpent connected to it. Huh. Oh, and of course, what is the Hulupu tree anyway? Some people say it's the willow. Other people say it's a date palm. I'm in favor of the date palm. I'll tell you why. Because Inanna is known as the lady of the dark clusters. So I'm thinking that maybe she's, right. You see where we're going with this. So I think that it is the date palm. That's my thoughts and perspective. And so we do have this world tree that is domesticated by Inanna. And you can see also it is the threshold place between all these different ideas, even connected to the Anzu bird and the Lilitu or Lilith, and obviously the serpent. Okay. Moving right along. You guys having fun yet? So, I always love these kind of stories. Okay. So, just like the Sumerians and the Babylonians before them, the ancient Assyrians viewed trees as filled with fertility magic, especially fruit trees, as you would expect. Winged guardian deities are often depicted as protecting these sacred trees, and in some cases, watering them. Okay, let's go to a really fun topic. Ancient Egypt. Now, for the Egyptians, each of their temples were understood to be stone representations of the landscape of creation, but in an idealized sense. Isn't that wonderful to hear, right? With its columns connected with all kinds of plant life, but most predominantly palm, lotus, papyrus bundles. Let's take a look at the next image. You can see it for yourself. Look at that, right? So by the 5th dynasty, the palm form column depicted the palm tree as a circular column, as if it were the trunk, with the topmost section ornamented with palm leaves, shown as if tied with a thong around the column. You can see that here. So many scholars and even ancient scholars say that the idea of the column originated with trees. What they would do is they would put the trees, they cut the trees down, make logs, put it upright, and put a lintel across it. So they were literally trees. And so the flutes and the columns represent, of course, the ridges of the trees. But in ancient Egypt, they decided to be a lot of scholars of architecture as well as others will say, well, the Egyptians decided to keep as much of the form of the tree as possible uh, with its ancient roots. Is that a bad joke? I don't know. And so it left more of the tree image there. I'm pretty good at this. I think I'll start my own column. Okay, upon the fluted plain. Okay, so moving right along. So you have, okay, I gotta stop. Let's go to the next image. There we go. I wanted to show you this more up close of a real example of the organic nature of that. Wonderful. Let's go to the next image. The ancient Egyptians specified particular kinds of trees as sacred, especially the sycamore, the acacia, and the persea. Now, the sycamore tree was so significant that even the hieroglyph written word to represent the word tree just happens to be that of a sycamore tree. That's right. The hieroglyph symbol to represent a tree in general is the form of a sycamore tree. The word sycamore is actually Greek. It's not Egyptian, meaning fig mulberry, with the main fruit obviously being the fig, each one about 2 to 3 centimeters in diameter, with very sweet, by the way, during the springtime of the year. I love figs. I'm a big fan of that, and I always go to the Indian market to get some fresh figs. So that's just me. But yeah, I'm getting hungry now. Guess where I'm going tomorrow? This the particular species that grows in Egypt and North Africa and around the Levant is known as the Ficus sycamoris, and it can become quite large, growing to be about 20 meters in height and 6 meters wide. With so yeah, very dense around the crown, spreaded branches, having dark green leaves that are heart shaped. So what happens here? The sycamore was one of the few good trees for fashioning objects out of wood for the Egyptians. According to Pliny the Elder, the wood, which is of a very peculiar nature, I'm actually quoting Pliny the Younger, is reckoned among the most useful known. When cut down, it is immediately plunged into standing water, such being the means employed for drying it. At first, it sinks to the bottom, after which it begins to float. And a certain length of time, the additional moisture sucks it dry, which has the effect of penetrating and soaking all the other kinds of wood. It is a sign that it is fit for use when it begins to float. So it's very great when it comes to building boats and so forth. The sycamore figs were used for various curative remedies, right down for helping heal hippo bites, because that's going to happen, right? The fig was also used for various beauty aids, such as hair removal, believed with the right mixture to remove any hair on the body, as noted by many. In fact, it was a remedy for removing hairs from any body parts. Uh, Boiled bones of the guk bird, fly, dirt, land, sycamore milk, gum, a lump of salt, warm, apply, and done. That's the ancient form of hair removal. Okay, according to the Book of the Dead, let's go to the image. I do have some images there. Let's go to the next image and see if it shows. According to the Book of the Dead, alongside the eastern gate of heaven, where the sun god Ra emerged each morning, stood twin sycamore trees, who were actually turquoise in color. Of course, this means the sycamore stood on the threshold between life and death, between the realm of the deceased and the realm of resurrection. In this sense, the tree was viewed as the tree of life, along with the acacia tree. Because of their close association with resurrection, sycamores were typically planted next to tombs, their energy believed to able to even revitalize the deceased. Furthermore, even the primary coffins were made out of sycamore wood, again believed imbued with resurrection power. This connection was deepened by the fact that many of the Egyptians believed that the mother goddesses would manifest themselves as a sycamore tree. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, you're seeing an image of this right here, right? Especially mother goddesses. For example, Nut. You have another example would be Isis and Hathor. Therefore, those who were buried within a sycamore coffin could be viewed as returning to the womb of the mother tree goddess. You guys got it? That great connection, right? Hathor was often called by the epithet Lady of the Sycamore. In many tomb paintings, the deceased at times with their wife are displayed as relaxing beneath the tree. Typically, it's a sycamore with the goddess Hathor emerging from its trunk. And we're seeing that image right here, offering them both refreshing fruit and drink. A good example of this image arises from the tomb of Sennadigim from the necropolis of Deir el Medina. Okay, so the next tree, let's go to the next image. There it is. Okay, all right. This is our next tree. Another important tree in Egypt was referred to as the Ished, and is most likely the Persea, the Persea tree, which is a species of evergreen, believe it or not, standing between 15 to 30 meters in height with simple leaves and flowers arranged in short panicles with 6 small greenish yellow segments. As for its fruit, it is typically an oval or pear-shaped yellow drupe with a fleshly outer covering surrounding the single seed and is related to the avocado, which comes from another kind of evergreen. Let's go to the next image. There it is, an earlier version of it. The oldest discovered Persea found arrived from Dozer's Pyramid during the area of the Old Kingdom. The branch of the Persea were often part of funerary bouquets and represented the Sacred Heart of Horus. One inscription set up by Speos Artemidos at Beni Hassan, following his description of the restoration of the temple, declares, "My divine heart searches for the sake of the future. My heart, that which it had not known forever, because of the command which the hidden Persea tree, Lord of the myriads of years, communicates," unquote. According to the creation story of Heliopolis, the phoenix not only arises out of the ashes, but arises out of the ashes of a burning Persea tree, which was understood as the tree of life. According to their belief, Ra split the Ishted tree, representing the tree of life, in the meaning after in the morning, after his victory over his enemies. Furthermore, Thoth and Shishat, realizing this tree's connection with life, were believed to scribe each king's name and the length of his reign on its leaves and fruits, protecting the ruler and perpetuating his name. In association with this ritual, one inscription for the new kingdom proclaims, "Her father Ammon hath established her great name, Makar, upon the august Ishtad tree. Her annals are myriads of years, possessing life, stability, and satisfaction. Son of Ra, Kernet Ammon Hatshepsut, beloved to Amun-Ra, king of gods, when she celebrated for him the first occurrence of the royal jubilee in order that she may be given life forever. So the idea is that if your name, remember, for the Egyptians, there are 5 parts of the soul, and one of the parts of the soul is your name. And so what they would do is they would protect your name with a cartouche around it. That's why it's there. That's why there's that little circle around the name, right? So the name has power. It connects to you. Well, when you apply that name onto the tree, this tree of life, what it does, it's believed that the energy of that tree energizes your name, and that energy of that name goes upon your ba and your ka and your shin. And what happens as a result, it gives you more power and longer life. So see how that works? The power of the name. So I always I think to myself, maybe if you graffiti on a tree your name, maybe that love, no, don't do that. Maybe that love will last forever, but I don't think you should do that because what happens, it destroys the tree. So I was be got to watch out for that. But you can see the ancient idea tied to this concept. All right, moving right along, let's go to the next image. Okay, good, good. All right, so what happens now is because of the yellow coloring of its fruit, the persea tree was often associated with the sun, and so it also had solar connections, especially with Ra. According to the book of Ani, Ra was portrayed, I love this one, Ra was portrayed as a cat about a persea tree that represents the tree of life. I'll read it right here. I am the cat which fought near the persea tree in Anu on the night when the foes of Neber-Achtur were destroyed. Who is this cat? This male cat is Ra himself, and he was called Mao because of the speech of the god Sa, who said concerning him, he is like Mao, unto which he hath made. Therefore did the name of Ra become Mao. Um, yes, yes, yes. The word for cat is sometimes it's meow and sometimes it's Mao, and you get the point. So whenever a cat starts to speak, it's saying the name of Ra. It's a power word. Also, mew is the Egyptian infinitive for to see. So when a cat goes mew, mew, it's saying to see, to see, to see. Or conversely, if you have what kind of a Siamese cat, right? It's going meow, meow. I guess it's saying raw, raw, raw. Okay. So, as concerning the fight which took place near the Persea tree in Anu, what happens, of course, it says, of the children of rebellion, when righteousness, retribution was meted out to them for the evil which they had done, of course, Ra is happy. But there you have it. Um, I think it's kind of cute, though, that Ra is can be presented as a kitty. I don't know. The funerary associations of the Persea tree are associated with the time when Seth tricked Osiris into going into a cabinet that turned out to be a coffin and then was sealed in and thrown into the Nile. Seth, by means of trickery, succeeded in enclosing Osiris in a wooden coffin, which he then threw into the Nile. Isis wandered for many years in many lands without luck. She grieved for her beloved husband and wept unceasingly. Yet he could not be found anywhere she wandered, for his coffin had been caught in the branches of a persea tree that had grown up around it and was now hidden even more deeply than before. The sacred tree had been selected by the king of Byblos in the papyrus swamps of the Delta to become the central pillar of his palace. The scent of the tree was so sweet that people came to marvel at the perfume it sent forth. During the Amarna period, the god Amun was connected with the Persea tree as the tree of life. One Wab priest of Amun writing, "My heart longs for thy look, O master of Persea tree, when thy neck receives garlands of flowers." During the age of the Roman Empire, Pausanias states that the Persea tree only loves the waters of the Nile and none other. Okay, so we understand the Persea tree, pretty important. Let's go to the next image. There it is, the acacia tree. The acacia tree was also very significant to the Egyptians. You can see it there, which is a savanna tree covered with small leaves and protected by thorns, and is able to survive on very little water. It was said that the goddess Sausis, who is also identified with Hathor, was born beneath a sacred acacia tree. Horus was also said to have emerged from it. Egyptians believe the acacia tree, along with the palm, carried the sun god Ra, as noted by the legend of Horus of Betut and the winged disc. It goes as follows. The boat of Ra arrived at the town of Het-Haha. That's brilliant. Its forepart was made of palm wood, and its hind part was made of acacia wood. Thus, the palm tree and the acacia tree have been sacred trees from that day to this. Unquote, actually, from that source. According to one version of the Heliopolis creation myth, following the emergence of the couple's Shu, which is moisture, and Tefnet, which is dryness, and the couple's Geb, earth, and Nut, sky, Isis and Osiris emerged out of the acacia tree of Isuet, often it being said that it is the tree in which life and death are enclosed. The name Isuet means in Egyptian, the great ones who come forth. So it's interesting. I do want to mention that the acacia tree, let's go to the next image. The acacia trees are also connected to a few others. Isis, in another story, in the contendings of Horus and Set, Isis, in the form of a sacred bird, flies into the branches of her holy acacia after tricking Set into condemning his own attempts to usurp the power of Horus. Another story, which is interesting, this is a poison curing spell, and it refers to Isis and the seven scorpions. In this particular spell, Horus is stung. He cries out in pain, and the doorkeeper at the temple of the holy acacia tree hears him and sends his cry to the heavens for help. Isis wasn't there because she was making libations for Osiris at that time. But what will happen is the acacia tree will then be used as offerings to both Isis and Osiris. We also know that the soul, the Ba, often receives water from the acacia tree, goddess of the other world after death. So the water is especially important. The acacia tree is understood as a very mystical tree, a tree where it really does connect from this world to the next, and is often associated with visions, with insights. And you know what? Acacia trees contain a lot of DMT, which is a psychedelic drug. And it was noted to be used by the ancients. So I'm just throwing that one in. So, in fact, even used today to induce ecstatic spiritual experiences. So maybe there's a connection here. I don't know. What do you think? Maybe. Let's go to the next image. Oh, it's real small. But that's the Egyptians also considered the evergreen date palm as sacred to the god Heth. Let's go to the next image. And became his special symbol, which is also even which is also even more important in that he was the god of eternity. Heh, is sometimes depicted as a frog with his name meaning endlessness. Now let's go to the next image. In an anthropomorphic form or a human with a frog head, Het is shown as holding palms in one or both hands. And in many cases, he is crouching down as he's holding these branches. And so you can kind of see this here. And I know what you're saying. You're going, heh, and you're saying his name. Let's just see my face for a little bit here. I want to, hey, there I am, right? So what happens is in hieroglyphs, the symbol of the evergreen date palm represents the idea of 1,000,000 years. So if you see the image of a date palm, remember, you see an image of a sycamore tree in hieroglyphs, that simply means tree. But if you see the symbol of this date palm, this evergreen date palm, that means in general 1,000,000 years. It's a long time. And as I said before, it's connected to He, whose name means endlessness. So what they will do is they will do kind of magic. Watch me. They will take the fronds of a palm tree, this evergreen date palm, and it's connected to its energy, and they will wave it back and forth. And of course, this is believed to be a magical exercise. And so, hence, to wave palm branches at someone meant not only to honor them, but also to have the idea of hopes that they would live a long life, perhaps forever. So, the significance of the palm branch as representing long life was shared with the Levant and much of the Near East beyond Egypt. Hence, in the story when Jesus arrived in Jerusalem and was moving through the Golden Gate of the city, the waving of the palm branches signified long life and the act that was bestowed upon heroes and kings. Eventually, the palm branch became understood in Christianity as representing Christ's victory over death. The emblem then continues on to the martyrs and such as Christian figures as Paul the Hermit and Christopher. But the idea is that what they're really doing is they're doing magic. They're doing this magic that's coming from this palm tree. Okay, I just thought that was interesting. Finally, there is the willow, also called the Tisheret, which was considered sacred to the underworld king Osiris. After he was killed, the willow sheltered his body, according to some legends. As in Mesopotamia, sacred garden precincts filled with trees in connection to the gods and goddesses was very popular. And the Egyptians, of course, believe in tree goddesses, many. And of course, when the famous female pharaoh Hatshepsut created her funerary temple around 1480 BCE, she wished to create a representation of the paradise of Amun via her terraced gardens constructed on her outer sanctuary. This garden was to be the palace for the sun god on earth. Now it was believed that her gardens had terraces of myrrh trees, and so Hatshepsut sent an expedition to Punt to acquire myrrh trees to make her terrace gardens even more authentic. And I want to tell you something even more fun. Did you guys know? This is something you've never heard of before. The Egyptians believed in talking trees. Yeah, we have, of course, stories, and I'll just give you one. There's a papyrus that was found. It's around 1100 BCE. It's a series of love songs to trees and fruits. And so I'll just read a little excerpt and keep on going. It says, the sycamore tree raises its voice tiny, insistent, shrill. Its seeds shine like the teeth of my mistress. The shape of her fruit is round like her breasts. Um, then of course the tree starts to talk and says, "I remain through every season. All go away except me and the garden. I make 12 months in the orchard. I began to sprout a bud when that of last year is still within me." And so there's all these there's and so you have a series of romance stories connected with trees and flowers and fruits. Um, I think I'm just saying this. I think that there's no full version of these that have been translated for the general public. Wouldn't that be fun to have a book full of ancient Egyptian talking tree romance poetry? I don't know. Is there any kind of demand for that? People love romance novels, Why don't we? Okay, moving right along. Okay, so anyway, uh, as you can tell, Egypt is of great interest. Oh, let's go to the next image. Um, I want to show you just briefly that remember I told you about the teeth of the sycamore fig tree, and I talked about the fruit. This is what the fruit looked like. I'm not sure. Do they look like teeth at all? They kind of look teeth like, maybe. I don't know. Let's move on to the next image. All right. Yes, we're on to Israel. Okay, so of course, most people have heard about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil that were said to be planted at the center of the Garden of Eden, according to Genesis 2:9. I do want to say that now, having heard the Sumerian version connected to Inanna, it uses the very same symbols as you have, if you haven't noticed. According to Genesis 2:9, out of the ground the Lord God caused to grow every tree that is pleasing to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And now, according to Genesis 2:16 to 17, Adam was permitted to eat of any tree, inclusive of the tree of life, except for except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Quote, and the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. That seems like a threat there, right? So you can have life or you can have knowledge. Take your pick there. After God told Adam this command, he created Eve for him. Of course, now the serpent comes to the scene. Hey, did we run into the serpent before? Yeah, I know. We ran into it in the earlier story. So what happens is the serpent appears and goes as follows. It says, now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? The woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you surely will not die, for God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate. She gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loin coverings. Okay, so let's go to the next image. So now you will note, I think this is an interesting image right here. You will note that there are two trees in the Garden of Eden rather than one, that being the tree of life, bestowing immortality, and a tree of knowledge of good and evil, bestowing the divine wisdom of discernment. Why two? Hmm? Now, in the Near East and around much of the world as well, what separated the gods from humanity was the fact that they were immortal and that they had supreme knowledge as well as being all powerful. Apparently, God was willing to give humanity immortality so long as they dwelled within the Garden of Eden, one of the big three that I mentioned, right? So gods basically in general are immortal, have supreme knowledge, and are all powerful. You guys got it? So as long as humanity hangs around that garden, right? Um, yeah, they can have immortality, but not willing to give them divine wisdom with such an ability for it would make them too close to God, because then they would have two out of the three prerequisites for being divine. Does that make sense? Right? I mean, you don't have to agree with them. I'm just saying, you understand that from an ancient Middle Eastern perspective, right? And as the serpent said, they would then be like God, knowing good and evil. So the fear for Eve was then the fear of losing what they already theoretically attained by proxy to the Garden of Eden, eternal life. And so the fear was of death if she partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So God, in this sense, was willing to give eternity if in exchange there was a relationship, but not as equals or even close to equals, right? If humanity gained the power of both trees, he would have theoretically gained a form of equality outside of being all powerful, with no tree representing that power. So when both took the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God then, by deduction, had to remove them from the Garden of Eden so that they would not have immortality. Of course, in Mesopotamian religion, the serpent represented chthonic powers of wisdom because of their root-like appearance, and so he would be the one to tempt Eve to access this divine knowledge. So much of this, I know a lot of people will view this as a Judeo Christian conception or a Jewish conception, but the reality is, as boring as it may seem, it's an ancient Middle Eastern perception. Are you guys getting that? That's just simply the way Samaria was. That's simply the way Babylonia was. And I know a lot of people don't know that. Of course, one may speculate on what kind of fruit the author of Genesis had in mind in connection to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The popular speculation that it was an apple, but this only came about during the Middle Ages, and it actually is a pun. Uh, you see, the Latin word for apple is malum, and the Latin word for evil in the Latin West is understood as malice. Aha, got it? Some scholars believe that the story of the Garden of Eden was actually an anti Canaanite polemic against the Canaanites, and so would have been a fruit that was favored by the Israelites. One of the top contenders for the fruit is actually the grape and the resulting wine from it. Of course, one of the first things that Noah did after the flood was to plant a vineyard, and subsequently he got really drunk from it. When the spies went into the Holy Land, they brought back with them clusters of grapes. And the Canaanite New Year's festival, with its drinking of wine to excess, was converted into the Feast of Booths and thereby made into a Jewish holiday, and so hence purified. I can't beat him. Uh, Join him, maybe, sort of. Okay. Early Christians would later associate the tree of life with the Christian cross, especially by the 4th century, when Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, supposedly found pieces of the true cross at the place where Jesus was crucified. Some claim that the wood used for the cross was actually from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You guys get that? So they believed, and then in turn became the cross. I don't know how it was preserved for so long. Another story told how Adam was actually buried at Jerusalem at the place of the Temple Mount, and that 3 trees grew out of his mouth that indicated the center of the world. So there you have it. Let's go to the next image. Yeah, I wish that picture turned out better. And the sad part about it is I've actually seen this tree for myself. Of course, the Oaks of Mamre in the West Bank's Mamre Valley near Hebron was believed to indicate exactly where Abraham received this promise from God by an angel that he would indeed have a son that would be the first of a great nation. This Tabor oak here was around 5,000 years old. And back in 1986, I got to go and see this actual tree, and unfortunately, it died in 1996. So basically, I got there, and 10 years later, it died. Hopefully, there's no connection there. uh, but however, I have some good news. There are some sprouts that are proceeding from it. So, in a linguistic sense, the Hebrew word for oak is alon and elon, which both happens to be related to the word El, which means God in Hebrew. So, hence, the oak tree in ancient Jewish religion was connected to El, or the All High God. Let's go to the next image. All right, let's talk about good old Canaanite religion. Well, we learn much about the early Canaanite religion from the Bible. Archaeology has revealed so much in the way of material culture, inclusive of other ancient texts. As a result, a clear picture about the beliefs of the Levant is arriving into full view in regards to the tree veneration. The worship of the goddess Asherah must be mentioned, either an actual tree or fashioned wooden pole represented the goddess Asherah, and she was the consort of Baal, or in some cases, she's a consort of El, often with altars dedicated to both of them together. Their altars were typically set upon high places, from low hills to tall mountains. Let's go to the next image. When the Israelites arrived into Canaan, they were instructed according to Deuteronomy 12:2 to destroy all the places wherein the wherein, okay, here it is. According to Deuteronomy, to destroy all the places wherein the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods upon the high mountains and upon the hills, and under every given tree. You shall tear down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and burn their Asherim with fire. That's a very small image, but you get the idea. Let's go to me again. Let's see, go back to me here. Of course, the question is, did the Israelites really destroy all the sacred trees and this popular veneration of them throughout Canaan? And the answer is quite simple. Of course not. We learn of more references to Asherah long after this reference in Deuteronomy. I will also mention the fact that the Asherah trees were so popular, these poles, that a certain king by the name of Manasseh actually brought Asherah into the actual temple itself, and it was there for about 2 or 3 decades before taken down by Josiah. So that means if you walked into the temple, there was an image of a sacred tree there. What do you think about that? Who says that? The Bible actually says that. Oh, okay. I guess I better be quiet then. Yeah. We do have, um, quite a controversy. There's a discover of an Ur at Lachish with an image that is associated with Asherah, and I'll just be very quick on this one. It's a 7-branched tree, and it looks exactly like, except a little difference of number, a menorah. So some scholars will say that the symbol of Asherah will be then symbolically moved to the candelabra symbol of the temple, and I just will run away from that quickly. But I'm just telling you, archaeology doesn't have any agenda. What do we do with this? From the 13th, we've other images too. Anyway, for what kinds of trees the Canaanites deemed as sacred? We know that the oak tree was one of them. Describing the corruption of Zion, Isaiah 1:29-31 declares, surely you will be ashamed of the oaks which you have desired, and you will be embarrassed at the gardens which you have chosen, for you will be like an oak whose leaf fades away, or as a garden that has no water. The mighty man will become tinder, and his work a spark. Both will burn together with no one to quench the fire. So on that happy note, we will move on to the Minoans. Now, in the Minoan religion, as we know from a plethora of images that have survived from the era, that which is often called the horns of consecration are a central feature. Now, in between these horns, whatever is to be consecrated are to be placed. So in between these horns, whatever to be consecrated are placed, whether it be a cult object or tool. Just kind of look at it like a target. It's like, it's between these horns. That's now a focus. And so that is considered sacred. You guys got it? It's like a sacred framework. The presence of the deity or spirit is then called to fall upon the object placed between the horns via various ritual acts, whether it be ecstatic dances or, as we see in one depiction, a woman blowing a shell horn. Sacred boughs from tree appear as favorite objects of consecration, sometimes directly between the horns and sometimes upon an altar positioned upon them. In one image on a gem of Vero, we find two spirits holding a libation pitcher over three boughs set between these horns of consecration. From a gold ring discovered at Mycenae, an image of a goddess, as determined by the double axe and six skulls around her, sits beneath a tree with worshippers approaching her, one of whom is touching the branches of the tree. Let's go to an image, shall we? So from the Triadic sarcophagus, a sacred tree appears between an altar and a temple. On the other side of the sarcophagus, another tree spreads its branches over the horns. So take a look. So see this, look at this image. So there seems to be some shaking of a tree going on here. You see that? And you have this goddess figure in the middle. In fact, women are often displayed as dancing and shaking these sacred trees. A gold ring from the Museum of Candia shows a woman standing in the middle, topless as typical of Minoan women, but possibly a goddess by her unusual stature and the way she floats above the ground, and stands between two other topless women who are grasping at sacred trees. Let's go to the next image. On either side of them with fruit. A gold ring, there it is, right? A gold ring from Phaestus reveals a woman completely nude performing the same action of shaking a tree with fruit on it. So what is going on? I don't know. Maybe I'll give an explanation, but it may shake you up. As noted by Dr. Stella Mandalaki, in the dance around sacred trees and rocks, the dancing of the leader is accompanied by two parallel or alternating dance mime actions of symbolic content, shaking the sacred tree and clasping the natural rock, features that lend a theatrical and dramatic character to the performance. Both sexes took part in the dance in open air sanctuaries or in the palatial environment within the context of performances connected with the epiphany of different divinities, male, female, or pairs. The firm shaking of the tree trunk, not a wild tree, but rather one planted inside the wooden enclosure, is probably intended to make the fruit fall. Clasping the rock has greater impact, since in most instances it is related to the immediate appearance of a divinity. This particular Minoan dance was also danced in the mainland Greece with many variations on the original. But let's go to the next image. So I want to add a little commentary onto this. Yeah, and I do believe that's true. They are shaking these fruit trees in order to bring the fruit down. That is, but also they are the trees themselves again have sacred energy moving from it. And so I want to add to the fact that we know for a fact that these trees, in so many images, are connected to the idea of divine ecstasy. Divine ecstasy, which, in fact, you saw some of it just now. And so I want to add to the point that I believe that the shaking of the tree is also a connection to this ecstatic experience that they are going through, and that the tree is offering them from the deities. It makes sense as a holy conduit. So I just had to add that. So yeah, good stuff. All right, let's take it on down. Thank you. That's a little Minoans. Now let's talk about the Greeks. The Greeks venerated many sacred trees, stemming from the time of the Minoans and Mycenaeans. Yeah, there was a pun there. According to the Greeks, the myrtle and apple trees were especially sacred to the goddess Aphrodite. Often the olive tree was connected with Athena. For example, upon the Acropolis of Athens, at the Pandrosium, located near the temple, known as the Erectatheum, there is a saltwater well with a mark in the shape of Poseidon's trident in a rock that is also interpreted as a living olive tree that is sacred to her. Let's go to the next image. Pausanias, the famous second century travelogue author, identifies many sacred tree sites and groves throughout Greece. First of all, describing the sacred groves of Asclepius at Epidaurus, he says that the sacred grove of Asclepius is surrounded on all sides by boundary marks. No death or birth takes place within the enclosure. The same custom prevails also in the islands of Delos. All the offerings, whether the offerers be one of the Epidaurians themselves or a stranger, are entirely consumed within the bounds. So you have this idea that this is a precinct. It's so holy, however, you got to be in good shape. You got to be alive. You can't be sick. Otherwise, it will taint this holy space. So there you have it. Let's go to the next image. The sacred grove of plane trees at Lerna also is mentioned by Pausanias. There is a sacred grove, he says, beginning on the mountains that they call Pontius. Now, Mount Pontius does not let the rainwater flow away, but absorbs it into itself. From it flows a river called the Pontinus. Upon the top of the mountains is a sanctuary of Athena, Satius, now merely a ruin. There are also the foundations of a house of Hippopodion, who went to Thebes to redress the wrongs of Polynices, son of Oedipus. At this mountain begins the grove, which consists chiefly of plane trees and reaches down to the sea. Its boundaries are on one side of the river, Patanes, on the other side, called Amatane, after the daughter Denis. Within the grove are images of Demeter and of Dionysus. Of Demeter, there is a seated image of no great size. Both are of stone, but in another temple is a seated wooden image of Dionysus, Savior, while by the sea is a stone image of Aphrodite. And it goes on. So plane trees are also considered sacred. Let's go to the next image. This is a plane tree. Now, what does a plane tree represent to the ancient Greeks? You're going to love this. At least I love this. Well, of course, plane trees, as you can plainly see, has great shade. According to Plato's Phaedrus, Phaedrus smears on. Phaedrus. What he does is he approaches a plane tree and he then swears an oath before a plane tree, and this plane tree is viewed as a god. But plane trees represent the idea of higher truth and integrity. And so the idea is that its canopy uh, creates a space and its shade not only for conversation, but for conversation of the highest kind. As a result, as I said before, Plato valued it and had many plane trees planted throughout his academy. So this is indeed the philosophical tree. Okay, so let's go to the next image. Another tree that is considered sacred is the ash tree, sacred to Apollo. Now, it's interesting that the ash tree is known as the meli. And of course, meli means honey. And so, therefore, this tree is associated with the honey nymphs, or I should say the honey dyads. Let's go to the next image. All right. Well, let's talk about dyads, or I should say dyads or dryads a little bit here. Let's go to the next image. Maybe that's a little bigger. There we go. Dryads. The dryads were the nymphs of trees and forests and groves. Some dryads were naiads, water nymphs, who happened to preside over the trees growing beside their spring or stream. Others were known as Oridais or mountain nymphs, connected with highland growing firs and manna ash trees. All these nymphs, whose number is almost infinite, may be divided into two great classes. The first class embraces those who must be regarded as a kind of inferior divinities, recognized in the worship of nature. The early Greeks saw in all the phenomena of ordinary nature some manifestation of the deity, and springs and rivers and grottos and trees and mountains all seemed to them fraught with life, and all were only the visible embodiments of so many divine agents. The salutary, beneficent powers of nature were thus personified and regarded as so many divinities, and the sensations produced on man in the contemplation of nature, such as awe, terror, joy, delight, were ascribed to the agency of various divinities of nature. The nymphs of the first class must be divided into various species, but you do have nymphs of mountains and grottos. You have, of course, nymphs of forests and groves. But what I want to say is that it is believed that, and this is not just the Greeks, this is the Romans too, that when you go to these trees, and let's just say that you want to use its wood, say you want to cut down a tree, you can't just simply cut down a tree. You have to appeal to the particular spirit that is connected to the tree, the dryad, and or connect to the spirit or entity that is guarding that tree. If you do not do that, bad things will happen. Got it? The tree will, the tree spirit will follow you home. And so both the Greeks and the Romans do believe this, which I'm sure for those who are woodsmen, it kept them pretty busy under their breath, making sure as they cut the tree that they say the proper formula, proper saying, in order to make sure that this tree is properly appealed to. Let's go to the next image. As I said before, oracles are connected to trees. One of the most famous is the Oracle of Dodona in Epirus. And I want to say a little bit about this. The Oracle of Dodona was at first in the open air, with the spring and oak the primary focus. In fact, the priests, called Seloi, were described as sleeping on the ground with unwashed feet. In the Iliad, the oracle of Dodona could be consulted even from afar, with Achilles praying, "High Zeus, Lord of Dodona, Pelasgian, living afar off, brooding over wintry Dodona." Obviously, this site is connected to specifically Zeus. Now, as mentioned, the priestesses of Dodona were known as the Seloi. They're also known as doves. And this designation may be related to the story of the founding of Dodona via the black dove, who proclaimed that this was to be his oracle site while perched upon his sacred oak tree, with the inspiration from this event carrying over to the names of those designated to speak on behalf of Zeus here. Thus, they were doves, like that first black dove carrying on the oracle, right? As for how the oracles were revealed, according to priestesses and priests, according to them, they entered into the sacred grove and then interpreted the rustling of the oak leaves to discern what Zeus specifically had to say. But they also, apparently, there also were bronze objects hanging from the oak branches, and they made sounds with the wind blowing, similar to a wind chime. So there's lots of things. So you sit there under the oak, you hear the rustling of the leaves, you hear the chimes that are hanging from the tree, and from this, the doves are able to interpret your special oracle. So this is the oracle site that's located there. All right. So let's get to the city of Ephesus. Let's see my old face back again. So the most ancient sources agree that the image of Artemis of the Ephesians was originally fashioned out of wood. Anton Bammer, who I met, he renowned Ephesian scholar and one of the most important archaeologists of the Artemisian since 1965, has uncovered remains of an early cult statue of the goddess that dates before the Croesus temple that was constructed in the 6th century BCE. Most of what has survived are jewels that once embellished her image, thousands and thousands of them, beads and precious ornaments and all the myriad trappings of the goddess's statue, the necklaces, the bracelets, the golden clasps that held the goddess's robes, the golden rosettes that were once sewn upon them, right? And her great bronze buckled belt that gathered the cloths together at her waist. Yes, yes, those survived from the original image. The jewels and clothing attachments most likely originated from the wooden image that would have swiftly rotted in the soft and wet earth, leaving behind still all her decorations. And that was discovered by Anton Bammer, who I had a chance to meet on a couple of occasions and had some great conversations with. He kind of looks like Albert Einstein. And a big brushy mustache and wearing shorts and long white hair. Anyway, the cult image had other associations to trees. Callimachus declares in his hymn of Diana, he says as follows: "For thee too, the Amazons, whose minds are set upon war, in Ephesus, besides the sea, establish an image," the word is britas, "beneath an oak trunk. And Hippo performed the holy rite for thee, and they themselves, O Upas queen, around the image danced the war dance, first in shields and armor, and again in circles arrayed as a spacious choir, and the loud pipes thereto piped shrill accompaniment, that they might foot the dance together. For not yet did they pierce the bones of the fawn," which means to make flutes, It's right. Yeah. And the echo reach unto Sardis and to the Breckenthinian range. And they with their feet beat loudly, and therewith their quivers rattled. And afterwards, around that image was raised a shrine of broad foundations. Then it shall dawn, behold, nothing more divine, not richer, easily will outdo Pytho, or the Pythian Apollo. There's a competition between the Pythian Apollo and Artemis. Hey, sibling rivalry going on. Now, as Colin Hemer points out, the wood for the image, the word for the image, britos, is a word used exclusively of a wooden image. Furthermore, the latter part of the passage implies the tree and image beneath it, perhaps easily confused in the tradition, were the central feature of the original structure and their site, and therefore the central feature of the latter succession of temples, in whose time the memory of the tree did indeed persist. Lee Donachi recognizes that this passage is particularly interesting when placed in the context of the full hymn, which everywhere else discusses actions of the goddess in founding sanctuaries and rituals. Only here does it stress the image itself as a foundational element. So again, that's fascinating that the image in and of itself is what founds the site. That the image itself is so fundamental to the cult of Artemis Ephesia, with veneration believed to date to the object itself, since it consisted of holy material, is a fact that cannot be neglected. It is a concept that needs to be carried over to help understand the worship of the goddess in the first as well as the second centuries CE. One wonders if there is a connection between Britas, beneath the oak tree, and Leto leaning upon an olive tree, which was still standing in Tacitus's day in the Ortygia garden, which gives birth to the twin deities beneath its shade. So you have another sacred tree that is at the Ortygia gardens. The goddess's association with the oak tree and acorns continued into the Roman period, with some of the cult statues displaying an acorn necklace. So I find that interesting. Of course, not all ancient sources agree that the image of Artemis was made out of the oak. We'll talk about that, but let's go to the first image. We do have an early image that I have in my book, so I'm going to show it to you here, of Artemis Ephesia in its earlier version. And this would be the one that would be represented by echoing the wooden image that existed in the temple, and would be the one that would be bejeweled by the artifacts that were discovered by Antimamer. You see that there? Okay, so let's go. But yes, of course, not all ancient sources agree, as I mentioned. Pliny the Elder believes the official cult statue was actually carved out of a Lygos tree, providing evidence that the wrappings could have originally represented Lygos branches as well, further correlating cult practices between Artemis at Ephesus and Hera at Samos. So let's take a look at the next image. There we go. So there's me by a Lygos tree as taken by Sarah. In ancient times, the Lygos tree was associated with chastity, and Artemis Ephesia certainly was viewed in connection with virginity. Pliny the Elder describes how Greek women often sprinkled the leaves from the Lygos tree upon their beds, believing such an act preserved their chastity, making them less interested in sexual activity, or, in his words, able to, quote, cool the heat of lust. This is especially true during the Greek festival of Thesmophoria, dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, when wives left their homes and husbands for a while and slept in temporary shelters outside of the city. The Greek physician and botanist by the name of Pedanius Dioscorides from Cilicia, living around the same period, correlates this bedtime chastity ritual, adding that the smell alone was bad enough to repel any man possibly interested. Of course, Greek and Romans believed Lygos leaves and berries worked on men too, lowering the libido. Let's go to the next image. There we go. So there's some there's something for there's some berries there held by that's Sarah's hand there. Oh, that's my hand. Okay. Yeah, in ancient medicine, the Lygos was also used to reduce pain during childbirth, which so happens to be one of the popular abilities of Artemis Ephesia, where women specifically called on the goddess to alleviate labor discomfort. Juice from Lygos berries were thought to help with milk production. According to Hippocrates, the plants actually enabled the placenta to expel from the body in a healthy manner. In addition, the father medicine applied the Lygos plant for many other medicinal purposes, including to reduce swelling for both external and internal injuries, for instance, to reduce an enlarged spleen, as well as cure fevers. Remarkably, by the way, the berries taste like wine. Pliny the Elder says the medicine was typically ingested as a juice, sometimes with the squeezed berries mixed with wine to make it less sour. Both in antiquity and today, Lygos trees thrive about the site of the Artemision itself, the Temple of Artemis, demonstrating a ready-made context for such applications to ritual as well as iconography. According to Pausanias, the goddess Artemis received the epithet Lygodesma, meaning Lygos bound, because her cult image was discovered literally caught in an upright position within a Lygos tree. Also, in reference to the image found in this upright position, the goddess received another epithet, that of Artemis Orthia, Orthos, or upright Artemis. Also, the epithet Lygodesma is connected to the ancient belief that the gods had to be bound so they would not leave them. In a sense, capturing their image so they cannot escape and may be forced to do their wishes for their captors. As noted by Helen King, the famous Swiss uh, uh, thinker, has posited three reasons, why Artemis is connected to the Lygos tree. First, Artemis is associated with the plant world, and not just wild trees, but with cultivated trees. As we discussed here, the Lygos tree bore fruit that was cultivated for many reasons, including medicinal. Second, both plant and goddess are associated with wet and marshy areas, and this links to women who are regarded in Hippocratic terms as, well, wetter than men. The position of the cult of Artemis directly alongside the water, then, and as the harbor receded along a marsh that still annually inundates, is in close proximity to the Artemisian site even today, definitely fits this qualification. Let's go to the next image. Third, there is, of course, the idea that the medicinal qualities of the agnos, which reduces sexual desire but encourages menstruation and lactation. In this sense, Artemis is bound with this plant because she is eternally a Parthenos, or maiden virgin, but encourages sexual bloodshed at the appropriate time in other women. Okay, thank you for that. Let's take it down there. Around the Temple of Artemis itself was a sacred grove, and at the other side of Ephesus, the Ortygia Gardens was another sacred grove. The Ortygia Gardens were known for a fine wood with trees of all kinds, according to Strabo, possessing the greatest abundance of cypresses. Because cypresses were considered sacred to Artemis, the thick cypress groves must have created an idyllic setting for Ephesians wishing to experience her presence. Here, below an olive tree, Leto gave birth to Artemis and Apollo. So let's go to ancient Rome. Okay, so Uh, for ancient Romans, I know time is going fast. Romans believed, just like the Greeks, but even more so, that all was imbued with a divine spirit, a numen. Rocks and trees had this. The city of Rome even had a sacred tree, this being a fig tree located near the Roman Forum and sacred to Romulus, the king of Rome. Uh, Basically, the story goes it's called the Ficus Romulinus. It's a wild fig tree. It's also known as Lupercal. And what happened is that the floating makeshift cradle of Romulus and Remus landed uh, along the Tiber where this tree happened to be located. And so, yeah, it's significant in that sense. Rome had many sacred groves. The Aeneid by Virgil notes, next after this, he shows the spacious grove, which fiery Romulus the refuge named, and neath its cool cliff called the Lupercal. According to the Roman architect Vitruvius, the origins for the column for both the Greeks and the Romans originated from tree trunks. We talked about this before, with flute stylized representations of the rib marks of the bark. These columns were originally applied to the context of temples and so were directly sacred architecture in relation to trees. When Pausanias visited Olympia in the 2nd century CE, he noted that the temple of Hera still retained, this is interesting, two of its original columns of oaks, with the others replaced by stone columns because other wooden ones had worn out. So we not only do we kind of believe it? We had some during the 2nd century, some remaining uh, holding up these temples. Now, during Saturnalia, let's go to this next image here. During Saturnalia, both homes and temples, there we go. Both homes and temples were decorated with evergreen boughs. The reason being that the evergreen stayed green and hence lifelike even during the winter months when other trees lost their leaves. And so they became the symbol for continual vitality of even everlasting life. In essence, amidst the season of death and the waning sun, the evergreen symbolized the continuity of life. To bring the boughs to the community was then to magically bring the continual fertility of nature to humanity. You can put that down. I like that image though. Hence, continual abundance would be ensured. Sometimes laurel branches were substituted for evergreen branches. Obviously, the laurel is also important to both the Greeks as well as the Romans. It was the symbol of victory, of triumph. We see this in the Pythian games, the Delphic games, and so forth. And obviously, the Romans had the laurel being placed upon Caesars, right? So another sacred plant to them. In general, such ritual actions were condemned by Latin Christian theologians, especially Tertullian, who proclaimed, "Let them over for whom fires of hell are imminent, affixed to their posts, laurels doomed presently to burn. To them the testimonies of darkness and the omens of their penalties are suitable. You are a light of the world and a tree evergreen. If you have renounced temples, make not your own gate a temple." So Tertullian, always the consummate killjoy, and his 2 cents or 1 sesterces. So let's move on to the next image. It's a great tree. The oak in general seems to be sacred to most Indo-European people. In a related mythology, you have, for example, Perkons, the god of thunder, and one of the most important deities in the Baltic pantheon, especially the Latvians, Lithuanians, and Prussians. The oak tree just happened to be his sacred tree. The Norse views of the oak as a sacred tree to Thor, their god of thunder, is also to be well noted. For the god Taranis, god of thunder, amongst the many of the Celts, especially those in Gaul and Britain and Ireland, the oak was also his sacred tree. It must be pointed out that the Proto-Celtic word for druid, derwaweed, or druid, derives from their word for oak, but is also connected to the Proto-Celtic derwu or dru, the adjective meaning strong and firm. And so many scholars assert that the name for druid means strong knowledge. The inside of the oak trees were believed to be the abode for the dead. According to Arthurian legend, Merlin was imprisoned in an oak tree in the Britain forest uh, by, of course, the lady of the lake. Also, there's evidence that the month of the oak of Dur was around June or July, which happens to be the longest month of the year and the time of the summer solstice. Let's go to the next image. In connection to the oak is the collection of mistletoe by the Druids. Pliny the Elder in the 1st century CE records this ritual of collecting mistletoe. He says as follows. He says, we should not omit to mention the great admiration that the Gauls have for it as well. The Druids, that is what they call their magicians, hold nothing more sacred than the mistletoe and the tree on which it is growing, provided it is a hard-timbered oak. Mistletoe is rare, and when found, it is gathered with great ceremony, and particularly on the 6th day of the moon. Hailing the moon in a native word that means healing of all things, they prepare a ritual sacrifice and banquet beneath a tree and bring up 2 white bulls whose horns are bound for the first time on this occupation. Now remember, I'm reading right directly a source from the 1st century about this. He continues. He says, okay, so you have these 2 white bulls whose horns are bound for the first time on this occasion. A priest arrayed in white vestments climbs the tree and with a golden sickle cuts down the mistletoe, which is caught in a white cloak. Then finally, they kill the victims, praying to a god to render his gift propitious to those on whom he has bestowed it. They believe that the mistletoe, given in a drink, will impart fertility to any animal that is barren, and that it is the antidote to all poisons. In general, mistletoe was believed to grow in places that were struck specifically by lightning. Of course, obviously, mistletoes, the oak tree is connected to this idea of energy, of whirling energy, as a place that, yes, you have lightning attracted to it, but other kinds of energies as well. Okay, good. In fact, that's good for that image, I believe. Yes. Trees in general amongst the Celts were connected with renewal. From archaeological evidence, we know that at times entire trees were sacrificed as votive offerings in deep shafts and ritual pits, right? Although at times trees were substituted for wooden poles placed into these shafts instead. The Roman Pomponius Mela and Lucan say that the Celts of Gaul worshipped in groves of trees. According to Tacitus and Dio Cassius, the Celts of Britain did the same. Beyond the oak tree, let's go to the next one. Beyond the oak tree, believing that this tree represented immortality. The name of one Celtic tribe, the Eubornis, literally means the Ewe tribe. The tribe called the Lumvices literally means the people of the elm. Of all the kinds of wood, the Druids preferred their wands to be made out of the yew, and so is most of the band. So if you're making a magic wand and you are a Celt, you have to use the tree of the yew. Now, another tree. Let's go to the next one. While the Celts believed trees were the sources of wisdom in general, the hazel tree in particular was viewed as especially filled with wisdom and was also known to bestow upon the person poetic inspiration. From the earliest Celtic burial mounds and shaft wells, we find both hazel leaves and nuts, revealing early ritual context for this tree. Because of their revered powers of wisdom and inspiration, ancient wise women and cunning folk often used the wood from hazel trees for their ritual wands. Let's go to the next image. Accordingly, even forked sticks from the hazel tree were thought to be able to locate water and sometimes even buried treasured. So the Celts believed that much of the magical potency of the hazel tree arrived from its nuts, often termed as nuts of wisdom, that also were understood to act even independently to bestow mystic experiences and esoteric knowledge. At the heads of the seven main rivers of Ireland, seven hazel trees were located to bestow their powers of wisdom to their country. The hazel trees were also planted around sacred wells, specifically the Conola well, where it is believed the Boyne River originated, and the well of Segais, where the Shannon River derived its source. The magic of the hazel tree was transferred then to these rivers and to these wells when these nuts of wisdom fell into the water, supposedly causing magical bubbles that provided for wisdom and inspiration. Often they claimed that the local salmon would swallow these magical nuts, leaving behind a spot on the salmon's back. The more nuts the salmon ate, the more spots that would appear upon their backs. So all right, that's a nut of good wisdom there. Let's go to the next image. The Irish Celts were particularly partial to the ash tree. This is a beautiful representation of it. And I would like to be that person down below, sitting beneath that beautiful tree. The ash tree is believed to have mystical internal energy to the point where no one dared to cut down an ash to use for firewood, even if the wood happened to be scarce. For the fire within this wood could potentially burn down the person's house. The one exception was during Beltane, when its powerful abilities were perfect for the ritual bonfire. Even the fairies were said to fear the ash wood's power, and so were often used to ward them away. This is especially the case on the Isle of Man. In the Gaelic part of Scotland, wood from the ash tree was used to protect one from evil magical spells and other kinds of manipulative and harmful ritual practices. For children to drink the sap from this tree was was able to protect them. The ash tree was believed to be the bridge between worlds, between the sky and the earth and the underworld. So there you have that. All right. Um, so that's the ash tree. Okay. Thank you for that. Put that one down there. Good job, man. Now, the word for these sacred groves is said to be Nemeton. This name finds its way into the names of many cities. For example, Vermeton near Leicester in England. Because the Gauls later invaded Asia Minor, they carry the name to this location, but with some variations. We see there. At first, the policy under the early Christians was to cut down the sacred trees in order to get the local people to convert. For example, Gregory of Tours cutting down the sacred trees throughout Gaul in the 4th century. He would do this. He'd go to a place, see them venerating trees, and he'd cut down the tree. Uh, there there was one story where, uh, you know, well, we won't go into it. That's too long a story. Anyway, of course, eventually this policy was rejected, with syncretism instead encouraged by Pope Gregory the First, who decided to change the Christian missionary policy from tearing down pagan sites to reforging them for Christian worship. And he instructed this in the year 601 CE. Hence, if a sacred tree or grove were a focal point, rather than follow the policy readily adapted by Martin of Tours in Gaul and St. Boniface in Germany and tear it down, it was now best to reconsecrate this tree to Christ or some saint, and adjusting the local traditions accordingly. As a result, there was a papal precedent to accommodate even local Celtic and German holidays with a Christian purpose. Of course, in some cases, the sacred tree or grove have been torn down or would be, as would be expected in nature. And it would also die of natural forces, inclusive of age and disease. And so, what would happen in that case? Let's go to the next image. So, what happens here is one example of this is at Chartres Cathedral. It's built on a site once sacred to the Druids and once a location of a grove of sacred oak trees. But these oak trees did die out. However, the south portal of the cathedral preserves the memory of the sacred grove, depicting in cultural relief oak twigs, acorns, and even what appears to be tree images that really seem to be venerated. Archaeologists have determined that Chartres Cathedral was built upon a Neolithic sacred burial ground as well. A few scholars have noted that Gothic cathedrals, with their arches and vaults, uh, uh, really look like the interlacing of tree branches, resembling a path moving through overarching trees. Let's go to the next image. Many sacred trees continued to be venerated deep into the Christian era. For example, the holy thorn tree of Glastonbury was long a popular Christian pilgrimage destination, uh, powerfully standing by itself in the middle of an open field in South England. It was believed that this thorn tree, which is, by the way, a species of hawthorn, thrived during the first century, and specifically, says the legend, when Joseph of Arimathea, interpreted as Jesus's great uncle in this story, arrived to the region with the Holy Grail. At a certain point, Joseph stopped at this location to rest, sticking his staff that was once owned by Jesus directly into the ground. And when he woke up the next morning, he discovered that the staff was already set in deep roots and was growing into a thorn tree. During the English Civil War, the tree was cut down, but another from the original stock was planted in its place. Then suddenly in 2010, someone chopped the tree down in the middle of the night, cutting it into tiny pieces, leaving only a trunk behind. But as you can see, it will be it's being revived. But I'm sorry, that's a sad story. I'm full of these sad stories. Okay, let's go to the next image. Ritual poles or pillars intended to represent trees were often positioned upon hilltops by the Germans, and were called Irmensul, which means giant column. These Irmensul were intended to represent the tree of the universe. Charlemagne, which unfortunately I'm related to, cut one of the most famous of the Irmensuls down in the year 772 in order to Christianize the Germans. I apologize on behalf of my family. Go to the next image. The Germans also had what are called Tanzlinde, or dance trees, usually located in the middle of the villages, intended to shelter one from the heat, and yes, of course, to dance around during various celebrations. Most of the time, they are non-citrus, so as not to have fruit constantly falling on them and possibly spoiling a gathering beneath its shade, right? Boom, got hit in the head. This tree was believed to represent the community and their connections with the earth through her roots and with the sky through her branches. And in this sense, these dance trees also kept the sacred dance between above and below in balance. Dance trees were connected to fertility, they were connected to mating rituals, and via these conceptions, they were also connected to, well, love. Often the local goddess of love was connected to these trees. Germans later saw the heart-shaped leaves of, for example, the lime, called the tilia, linden, or basswood as symbols of passion, and the trees attracted amorous couples seeking seclusion. One of these trees still stand in Steinfurt, Germany, but requires scaffolding to continue to stand. And there are others as well. This is an example of one that was still standing in the 19th century. But I do know for a fact that throughout Germany, some of these ancient trees do still stand and connect to their communities. So let's go to the next image. Because the evergreens stay green and hence lifelike over the winter, much like the Romans, the Germans and Celts believed that these trees and others of its kind were the symbols for continual vitality and the continual of the potent fertile of life forces. Celts and Germans, for similar reasons, with some going further, decided to having smaller trees in pots rather than cut off the boughs, and they brought these into the house so that the living energy would continue to emit from these trees during the time of Yule. So, can you believe it? They cut down these trees and they placed them into the house. As for Yule, this Northern European observance occurred around the time of the winter solstice and was a time where sacrifices were offered. Also, by the way, ale drunk was in plenty, and fire rituals performed in celebration of the rebirth of the sun, because it was believed to be the resurrection of the male deity. Eventually, these Yule trees evolved into Yule logs, with the thickest part of the log placed directly into the hearth, while the rest of it stuck out into the rest of the room. As the Yule log burns, it is believed that its sacred energy is transferring into the light, correlated with the increase of the light to be realized following the winter solstice. And as a result of that, let's see my face a little bit here. As a result of that, magical words are said as it burns for various benefits for the next year. The magic from the Yule log is believed to have healing properties. The Yule log was cut down on Christmas Day, with the first person to visit the family supposed to strike the log with a poker. How many sparks that fly is said to reveal how much good luck you will have in the next year. So you got to make sure that they hit that log pretty in a pretty fierce way to get as much sparks as possible, but not so much as to burn down the house. In the Balkans today, part of this Yule log tradition, known as Badjak, continues, but instead of magical words being said over the Yule log, prayers are said instead. Even before the Indo-Europeans, inclusive of Romans and Germans and Celts, of course, the idea of bringing in vegetative life into the homes just prior to the winter solstice was a common custom. It was even a common custom in ancient Anatolia, in the Near East, and even in ancient Egypt, with the Egyptians bringing in date palm leaves to symbolize the triumph of life over death in the natural realm, so that the diminished sun may be indeed renewed. But now legends start to grow that when Christ was born, understood as occurring on December 25th, his divine light, as connected with the sun, in a miraculous way melted the snow upon these trees throughout the earth, while at the same time re energizing them so that they burst out with new life as fresh green shoots came from them. When Christian missionaries observed these customs amongst the Germanic and Slavic peoples, they reinterpreted these trees from bringing magical fertility into the households to representations of Christ's triumph over nature on the momentous day of his birth. And so the Yule and the Yule tree received then a Christian representation. The Celts, Germans, and Slavs all decorated trees in nature as representing their gods. When St. Boniface came to these German tribes, he began to cut down their sacred trees. But one legend had it that after he cut down an oak, it immediately sprang up with a young shoot, and he viewed this as a miracle from Christ, who he believed was in charge of the natural world. By the Middle Ages, Christmas Eve became associated with Adam and Eve, with the various passion plays often featuring a decorated fir tree with hanging fruit, usually apples, representing the Garden of Eden. These passion trees were called paradise trees and were the symbolic tree bookend to the other tree, which was the Christian cross. And so while the paradise tree represented humanity's expulsion from the Garden of Eden, it also had the promise that Christ would return to set the relationship right with God again. But by the end of the 15th century, many passion plays were considered too rowdy and even heretical because of its sloppy, popular understandings of theology, and so became more restricted and even forbidden. Some scholars believe that those now denied the beautiful paradise tree from the passion plays in a public setting. It was no longer allowed to be there, right? But still, there you have it. Yet, with this said, the first evidence for revival of the importance of these trees in connection to Christmas seasons arrived from Riga. Let's take a look at the next image. So, and that comes from 1510. And it does not appear to follow the Passion Play tradition at all. Today, there is a plaque located at the site of this tree in 8 different languages. In fact, the Riga tree was hardly a paradise tree, for it was burned like a Yule log after a while. It was tended by strange men wearing black hats. According to Latvian sources, the Riga tree was covered with paper flowers and dried fruits. Those wearing the black hats were part of an actual brotherhood of the black hats, consisting of those working in trade industries as well as ship captains. Most of them were also quite fond of, well, drinking, some even notorious drunks, which leaves the question of just how serious was this gesture? A true act of piety or simply a drunken whim connected to some kind of dare? The fir tree was to be burned following Christmas on January 6th and was understood as supplementing the Yule log by making a grander sacrifice on behalf of all the brotherhood and the city. The Christmas tree was placed in the middle of the city so all could participate in this ritual. There's also evidence that this act was performed in Riga as early as 1476, but less is known about the details of this event. Yet recently, other evidence has surfaced that has come about that the Estonian city of Tallinn had its own Yule tree as early as 1441, and that they should claim the honor for the first Christmas tree. Next, what is most likely an actual paradise tree, this time appeared in Strasbourg around 1521. Still, it is most likely that the old pagan past associated with the fertility tree now mixed with that of the paradise tree. As for the Martin Luther legend, it is pure myth. In the 17th century, Christmas trees became more popular, with one unknown resident from Strasbourg stating, at Christmas, they set up fir trees in the parlors at Strasbourg and hanged thereon roses cut of many colored papers, apples, wafers, gold foil, sweets. Around 1650, The Lutheran theologian Johann Danhur wrote in his work known as the Milk of the Catechism that, quote, the Christmas or fir tree, which people set up in their houses, hang with dolls and sweets, and afterwards shake and deflower. Whence comes this custom, I know not. It is child's play. Far better were it to point the children to spiritual cedar tree, that of Jesus Christ. Once again, rather a killjoy. You can go ahead and put that one down. So the Christmas tree was then brought over to the Americas by the German immigrants and appeared around 1700 in Pennsylvania. The French started their Christmas tree tradition in 1837 when the Princess Helen of Mecklenburg adopted this custom following his marriage to the Duke of Orleans, and so set up a tree directly in Paris itself. Only a few years later, in 1841, the very German Prince Albert of Saxony, who married Queen Victoria, brought the Christmas tree to England and planted one directly in the middle of Windsor Castle. Yet still in 1850, Charles Dickens was still referring to the Christmas tree as a, quote, a new German toy, unquote. So you can see how these ancient beliefs and ideals connected to the sacred tree go right into the Christmas tree pretty directly. Let's go somewhere else. I know I want to close up, but I just have to do a few more, not that many more. I want to go to India, though, real quick. Can we go to India, please? With their male counterparts known as the Yakshas. The Yakshis, accordingly, were said to inhabit the sacred tree in each village and to protect the prosperity and well-being of the community. Yet conversely, the Yakshis were sometimes malevolent, bringing sickness and even epidemics, especially if you ignore them or they're not properly reverenced. Just like the fairies, Yakshis and Yakshas were unpredictable. This dual personality often made for very nervous worshippers. Because of this, more than just simple spirits within nature or mere outgrowths from an earlier age of animism, the Yakshis and Yakshas eventually received rather elaborate rituals that combined appeasement and fertility in an effort to create some kind of harmony amongst all living things around each locality. Also, like leprechauns or Idean-dactyls, Yakshis and Yakshas were guardians of hidden mineral treasures, either deep below the earth or just beneath the roots of trees. The general appearance of Yakshis and Yakshas varied dependent on attributes, The male Yakshas are sometimes handsome and strong warrior types, or they can be great monsters with gaping mouths, or dwarves with protruding bellies. This is in India. Likewise, the female Yakshis are sometimes very seductive and beautiful women with saucer-shaped eyes, black long hair, articulated hips, or they're vile Medusa-like creatures. Let's go to the next image. There's another representation. You can see the tree there. Let's go to the next one. Now, the gateway of one famous shrine from the Shungan period once stood before a now mostly destroyed stupa located at Bharahut, but now stands complete at the Indian Museum of Calcutta. Here are preserved 4 fertility spirits directly upon the gates, including both female Yakshis and male Yakshas, depicted on the pillars, one on either side of the central portal, with 2 other 4 pillars down each side, respectively. These Yakshis and Yakshas, very frontally designated, resemble in many ways the village stone statues described, as I said earlier. In contrast, another Yakshis found here, known as the Cholakos Devatas, is very elaborately carved with wide, almost naive eyes, full breasts, and elaborate 6-row beaded necklace. So this Yakshi gracefully holds a flowering mango in one hand while holding onto a trunk of the same tree with both her other hand and her feet while standing upon an elephant. So you have these ideas. So they are, in many cases, real tree huggers. So there you go. Let's go to the next image. there's one hugging a tree, as I said before. So there you go. What's interesting, let's bring this up. This is not in my notes at all, but I'll bring up is that one way you can always tell Yakshis that's connected with trees is that her heel, her back of her heel is touching a tree. Uh, so it doesn't have to be a tree hugging one like you see this year. If it just even barely, even if the back heel is barely touching a tree, that means it's a Yakshis connected to sacred trees. So just a little bit of info there. Let's go to the next image. In Japan, trees are venerated in Shinto shrines. Especially sacred is the sakukai, a branch from which struck upright in the ground is represented by the Shin-no Midirashi, or sacred central post, over and around which the wooden shrines are built. In general, I want to say that in Japan, there's about 100,000 Shinto temples, often standing. Before each one is a torii, or a sacred archway, with a top beam arching upward at the ends as if reaching heavenward. The original purpose for the torii is interesting because its origins go back to the idea of sacred trees. That once when you enter into a Shinto shrine, you entered through two sacred trees placed on either side. Eventually, they were replaced by central poles. Sorry, two poles on either side that were viewed as bird perches. In fact, the word torii, which is used for these gates, means bird. And so many believe that they were originally intended as perches for birds to sing the praises of the gods and spirits. If, of course, if this is the interpretation, then they may be also related to certain Korean poles known as a sotdai. These poles having one or more birds perched on top and positioned before villages next to, well, totem poles called yangsung, which were viewed as talismans warding off evil spirits. In addition, such bird perches to defend against evil, to bring good fortune, are also found in China, Siberia, and Mongolia. So, torii in the form that we discovered in Japan as an entranceway with its upturned top beam are known to exist even before Buddhist shrines in China, Korea, Thailand, and throughout East Asia. In fact, what resembles the Japanese and Chinese torii are found connected to Buddhism. We see this as well. So these are what I also find is interesting is some of the older ones, you have carvings in the top part, you have carvings that are related to birds, and then lower you have carvings related to animals of the land, and at the base you have carvings related to underworld kinds of spirits or animals. And that, by the way, it's probably just a coincidence, but it's interesting because in the Pacific Northeast, you have totem poles that have the same designations. And it's also interesting because I'm going to go here. The Mayans and the Aztecs also have the same configurations when it comes to their world trees, with the birds above, the animals in the middle, and the snakes and other kinds of creatures below. Maybe just a coincidence, but I find it absolutely fascinating. So let's jump to the next image, and this will be the last thing we talk about. I have to talk about the Mayans, otherwise I'll be remiss. And then I'm going to call it a night. My throat is getting scratchy here. Okay. Most Mesoamerican cultures has some form of the world tree, whether it be the Olmec, Mayan, or Aztec. And from their roots, they appear to agree on the very same kind of tree being sacred, that known as the Kiba tree. Which can grow up to 70 meters. That's 230 feet high, and is characterized by having a very straight, largely branchless trunk that suddenly culminates in a spreading canopy towards the very top, giving it almost a cross-like appearance. Because of its shape, this tree was deemed to resemble the central axis of the heavens and thereby came to represent it. Hence, its morphology determined its role. The world tree, considered the central axis of the entire Mayan universe, also occupied three vertical domains, with its trunk representing the middle world, its roots descending through to the underworld, and its highest layer part representing the other world. The other world was the starry canopy of heaven. The middle world was the stony realm made fertile through the shedding of blood. And the underworld was dominated by the darkest of waters. The Mayans believed that all three of these domains were infused with life. Humans could indeed connect to the other world via the world tree running along the axis way of existence. The world tree itself was not located at any specific point, but became actualized through ritual. In a sense, the ritual itself made this tree materialize, to come into focus, and to become reality. The local king himself also helped this tree materialize. Tree imagery is visible everywhere about the Mayan site of Palenque. And one intriguing image shows the great Lord Pakal climbing the sacred tree in death, with his umbilical cord directly connected to the trunk, which represents the Milky Way. And naturally, the umbilical cord represents birth, but in this case, the imagery is associated with death too. The crossing point of the sacred tree was not merely the portal of creation, but the gateway into the underworld. Through their ecstatic visions, the various kings were entrusted with the role to make this sacred axis come into existence. Mayan kings also were identified with the sun, called the Great Sun Lords, Ma'kaina, and were believed imbued with potent sacredness via the medium of their elaborate costumes, with each accessory from their headdress to their near guards, representing some god, some spirit, some totem, or some myth. They even held sacred emblems of the gods. And so, in this array, the king was protected by the god's magic and able to command authority that was not often questioned, for he made a god or was made a god through his royal trappings. Let's go to the next image. The world tree is often marked by the monkey faced deity to reveal the identity of this image as truly sacred in and of itself. Perched at the very top of the world tree is the celestial bird deity, symbolized by a bird in the middle of the directional models of the world. The termination point of the branches of the world tree is sacred and is typically adorned by serpents and covered in jewels with squared off snouts. These serpents are representative of liquid offerings, specifically offerings of human blood that feeds and nourishes the world tree continually. Now, within the branches of the tree resides the double headed serpent bar of kings. This bar, also known as a ceremonial bar, literally was once an actual scepter that was held by Mayan rulers. But in the context of the world tree, this bar or scepter came to represent the sky itself, as well as representing a potential vision path. The world tree often arises from behind the rear head of the cosmic monster. The cosmic monster appears as a hybrid with a dragon body and a head in the form of a crocodile. The cosmic monster represents the planet Venus. He sometimes appears with two heads, having one head in front and one head literally behind. Although With this said, sometimes the secondary rear head is not actually that of the cosmic monster himself, but of another celestial creature, which is symbolically shown as his burden, known as the quadripartite monster. Here, the image of a somewhat macabre with head depicted as divided between a flesh form from the nose up and a skeletal form from the muzzle down. He usually holds or has near him a flat, blood-letting bowl. Accordingly, in these configurations, the cosmic monster's head in front represents the planet Venus, while the rear head of the monster represents the sun. In the big cosmic picture, then, the two together represent the movements of Venus, the sun, and the rest of the planets in tow. Hence, the Milky Way by night and the expanse of the skies by day. The cosmic monster stands as the divine guardian between the realm of the natural and that of the supernatural. He becomes a gateway between the two worlds. You take this down. Thank you. A parallel, and in some ways an extension of the world tree, is what is often called the maize tree. Perhaps another way to view this tree is another facet of the other one. Yet, while the world tree is often connected to cosmological speculations and projections, the maize tree is connected to the cultivation of nature here on Earth. Much like the world tree, the same monkey divinity christens the cross to mark it out as sacred, usually located at the center of the tree. And again, like the world tree, the tree symbolizes the central axis of the world. But instead of the cosmic monster at the base, the maize tree has a concross water lily monster who stands for the canals of irrigation as well as the marshes. Most poignant are the branches of the maize tree. I want you to hear this. While the branches contain ears of corn, each grain is actually replaced with a living human head. The symbolism is double here. First of all, this is an obvious reference to the creation story where human flesh was created from maize, while the blood was formed from rainwater. The other factor is connected to the sacrificial rites that keep this tree alive. The summit is crowned with the water bird, who is often wearing the mask of the celestial bird. As we can see, via the representation of the maize tree, while the gods provided humanity with the gift of life and their basic needs, they were still dependent upon humanity, to offer up life in return. Blood was viewed as possessing the vital life force necessary to keep both humans and gods alive. The life spirit within blood could be offered to the gods to feed upon through sacrifice. And while animal sacrifices were known in Mayan rituals, human blood and human sacrifice were considerably more appropriate offering to the gods. And the fresher the offering, the better, for more of its vital force was believed to be contained within, and so amounted to, well, a greater sacrifice. That is why many were sacrificed directly at the altar itself. In some cases, after anointing the person with blue dye, the priest would cut open the victim's flesh and crack the sternum via a flint knife as fast as possible so that the heart may be offered still palpitating over the altar, sometimes with the victim looking upon his own heart. Still, this was not intended as an act of cruelty, although such displays are inherently cruel, but to guarantee the freshness of the blood during the sacrifice in order to renew the powers of the gods so that it may give uh, energy and life in return. But what's interesting about the cosmic tree of the Mayans and the Aztecs is it represents the three different worlds, right? You have the world above of the heavens, you have the earth, and you have the underworld. It's so interesting because the Huluput tree of the Sumerians, you also have that same idea of the realm of the sky, the realm of the earth, and the realm of the underworld. Huh, it's fascinating because the Celts have that same idea of the realm above in the sky, the earth, the underworld. In fact, we see this even amongst the Egyptians. So many cultures have this idea of a world tree. Uh, I want to say something that's also, I want to add to this, that even in Buddhism, you have these architectural monuments known as stupas that represent holy mountains. What is fascinating is on these stupas is a tree on top. The tree, of course, connects to Buddha, one umbrella. The next one, of course, obviously to the sacred ways, the Dharma, and finally, of course, obviously the Sangha, the monastery. But they also call it a sacred tree. And so these stupas, which are connected to Buddhism, also have a tree, and it is understood as a sacred tree. Well, and of course, you can go all the way back. And I want to conclude with this. As elaborate and amazing as these ideas are, in the most simplistic form, can you understand why early humanity would see these trees as connecting these realms together, even without the diverse theology and mythology caked upon it, steeped high and thick? You still have, when you look at a tree and you notice so many of the trees, you have the branches reaching out above towards heaven. And then below the trunk, you have the roots branching out toward the earth. It's the most natural connection to the realms of all three put together. And you could see why they would see these as conduits of sacred power and potency. Um, and there you have it. Thank you so much. And that's it.